So
vayan
if you want to listen to the
al fondo
interpretation in one or the other language,
y, y marquen el mundito y
please
cambien de
go to
idioma.
the globe icon
Pero
and choose
bueno,
your
vamos
language of
a
preference
empezar
from
la
there.
sesión para no
So we're going
perder
to
más tiempo
be
y para
launching
darle
this
espacio al
session
resto de
because we
las
don't want to lose any
espectaculares.
more time.
Y vamos a
We have
comenzar
three
con
top-notch
Ricardo Miron,
speakers, as
que
I
es Chief
said, and we're
Technology
going to start
Officer de
with
Digital
Ricardo
Public Good
Miron,
Alliance,
the Chief
y
Technology
nos va a
Officer
presentar
of Public Good
los highlights de
Alliance.
cómo los
And
Digital
he's
Public
going to be
Goods, y
presenting the
particularmente
highlights of
Open
how
Data
digital public
y
goods
inteligencia
and open
artificial son
data and
cruciales
AI
para la
play a critical
infraestructura
role
sostenible del gobierno.
for
Ricardo,
sustainable
muchísimas gracias
government or
por
public
estar aquí en esta
infrastructure.
sesión
Ricardo,
y
thank you
bueno,
very much
el
for being
floor
with
is
us
yours.
today, and the floor is yours.
Hola, muchas gracias y
Hello,
muchas gracias
thank you
por
very
invitar.
much, and
Voy
it's
a
truly a pleasure
compartir
to
una
be here with you
presentación
today. I'm going to be sharing my presentation now.
y me dicen si pueden verla.
Please let me know if you can see it.
Sí, la vemos perfecto, gracias.
We can see it perfectly. Thank you very much. That's
La
great.
presentación está en inglés,
So the presentation is in English,
pero no sé si la
but
mayoría aquí habla español. Puedo
I
dar
don't know if we have a majority of Spanish
Igual hay
speakers or
interpretación,
English
así que
speakers.
simplemente cambian de
There's
canal. Si
interpretation
querés hablar en
nonetheless.
otro
They
idioma,
can just
Vale,
switch the
vale.
language, so
Bueno,
just speak
hagámoslo en
the language
español
that you feel more
y
comfortable with.
pues bueno,
So we're
espero
going to do it
ayudar,
in
pero sobre todo
Spanish,
para entender.
and I hope that the content
Mucho
will be
gusto a todos.
understood
Mi
in
nombre es
English.
Ricardo, soy
It's a
el
pleasure to
CTO en la
meet
Alianza
you.
para
I
Digital
am
Public Goods
Ricardo, and I am the
Alliance.
CTO at the
Y si
Partnership
bien mi
for
background es como
Digital Public
desarrollador de
Goods.
software,
And although my
yo parte de
background
mi
is a
carrera
software
he estado
development,
trabajando en
most
el
of
área
my
de
professional
cibernética,
career,
Open
I've been
Data,
working in civil
el gobierno
tech,
abierto.
open data, open
Y
government.
bueno, esto se relaciona bastante con lo que
And
hacemos
this is
en
closely
TPGA.
linked
Y
to
quizás
what
me
we
gustaría
did at
empezar
TPGA. And
darles un poquito de
I'd like
quiénes
to
somos,
share a
qué
little bit
hacemos,
about who we are, what we
más
do,
puntualmente
and after
la
that,
parte
I'm going to
de
address
abierto
specifically the work we are doing
y
on
inteligencia
open
artificial.
data and AI.
En corto, somos una red
In sum,
de gobiernos, de
we are
organizaciones
a
no
network
gubernamentales,
of different
inversores,
multilateral
capitales,
organizations,
compañías de
funders, think
tecnología que
tanks, and
trabajan
technology
alrededor de
firms
tecnologías
that
open source o
works
de código
on open
abierto
source
para
technologies
el cumplimiento de los objetivos
in
que
order
tiene el
to
SDGs.
attain the
Nosotros
SDGs or Sustainable
trabajamos en
Development
un
Goals.
panel sobre cooperación digital de la
We have
y asociamos
we integrate a panel on digital
recientemente
cooperation. We are now
temas de
an
otras
independent
cosas.
secretariat that works around
Nos
other issues as well.
encargamos de coordinar el
And
ecosistema
we are
para
in
el
charge
desarrollo,
of
el
coordinating
fondeo,
the whole
la
ecosystem for the
implementación
development
y
funding and
la promoción de
implementation,
lo que nosotros le llamamos
as well
políticas públicas
as the
digitales. Somos
promotion of
actualmente
what we call digital public
más o menos
goods.
45 organizaciones miembros.
Currently, we
Trabajamos en más
are
de 200
approximately
proyectos y
45 member
trabajamos en
organizations
50 países.
working on over
Y
200
pues bueno,
initiatives
quizás antes de irme
and in
directamente al
50
rol de
countries.
datos abiertos e inteligencia artificial,
So,
si hay
before
algunos
diving directly into the
contextos
role
sobre
of
lo que
open data
hacemos,
and
para
AI,
nosotros como un
it'd be
gobierno
great
digital.
to
Y
set
para eso
the
me
context or
gustaría
the tone
contarles sobre un
of
proyecto
what
en el que
we
varias de
consider
las
to be a
organizaciones
digital
se puedan
public good.
contribuir.
To do that,
Sé
I'd like
que
to share a
temas
little bit
que
about a
han
project
estado
where I had the
en el servicio
opportunity
público
of
o que algunos
participating and
ahorita
contributing. And I
estamos
know that
cubiertos
many of
por la
you that have been working
están
on public service
familiarizados.
or that have
Uno
attempted
de
at
los
one point or the other
principales
to use open
retos
data are
que
somehow familiar with this. One of the
siempre
main
veo en el tema de
challenges
datos abiertos en gobierno es que incluso aunque
that we always
tengas
face in terms of open data
la
and
voluntad
government is that
política, aunque hayas firmado el
even if
charter,
you have the
hayas
political
firmado la
will,
ley y
even
ya
if you've
tengas
signed the charter,
políticas
you are a part
públicas
of
y el hecho
OTP,
de
and
también
even if you have implemented public policies in
aportar
this regard,
datasets abiertos
opening up and
considerables de calidad
maintaining
es una
open data
tarea
sets with a
pues
certain level of
bastante grande y
quality
muy
is
complicada.
quite a titanic
Y
and
esto es
complicated
cierto
task.
para países o organizaciones con
And
bastante
this is
recursos,
true
fuertes
for
gobernantes, para datos
well-resourced
abiertos
organizations and countries, but even
ambiente
so
local, o
more
sea,
for
aprovechar
developing
estos áreas
countries
tan
where the local
conocidas por nosotros
environment
para poder
does not always have the
implementar
necessary technical equipment to
y
identify, collect, prepare,
producir
process, and produce
dataset o abrir datos
data
de
sets
mayor
or open up
calidad.
data with a
Y
certain
pues
level of
este es el
quality.
caso y en muchos
And
municipios en
that
México,
is
por
the case
ejemplo,
in
desde
many
que yo soy
municipalities in
miembro
Mexico.
de
That's where I'm
autopistas como
from,
los datos de transporte público
where
o el
certain
clúster.
data as
Este
public
mapa pues
transportation
muestra
data is truly
una Ciudad
unavailable.
de México que
This
se
is a
llama
map of a
Jalapa.
Mexico
Es una
city
ciudad
called
pequeña de más o menos
Jalapa. It's a small city with approximately 500,000 inhabitants. Well, it's not so small, but it's the first digital map of bus stops, public transportation lines and routes, and other information that in the past used to exist only as static PDF documents and they were probably outdated. In order to create this first digital map, well, this was carried out thanks to a project that we called Mapatón Ciudadano or Citizen Mapathon that started out of this current need that many municipalities share to have this information on public transportation routes, something pretty basic, if you will. And in many other places in the world, in Latin America, transportation has been licensed to third-party companies. So the government often lacks this information itself. And this is often operated informally, which restricts the possibility of the government to make decisions and to provide the services adequately. So to make a long story short, the government, along with many volunteers, developed an open source application and organized the different users of public transportation that actually hopped on the bus in order to map these routes on the different bus stops so that the map could be created jointly. This is the first pilot initiative at the city of Jalapa, and it was pretty successful. And throughout the years, the information improved, and many cities in different countries have used it, and it's been supported by other organizations as well for different initiatives that go beyond public transportation and cover other types of infrastructure. For instance, 3 years ago, it was used during a hurricane we had in Mexico in order to map shelters, assistance centers, medical emergency centers, and other types of services and elements throughout that disaster. This initiative was successful due to the fact that the application was open source software so that anyone could reuse it. But more importantly, the components that helped create the project itself were digital public goods. What does it mean? That it was not only the software, but it was also open data, open AI systems, open standards, and open content that were designed in such a way as to respect privacy, follow best practices, and generally speaking, they were designed to solve global problems and other problems that we face in our environments and that are comprised in SDGs. Just to give you a couple of examples of these technologies, the map used to build the model was on OpenStreetMap, that is the largest open data database. We use the General Transport or GTS so that data could be interoperable and used in other digital services. And they were disseminated through an open data portal based on CCAN, which is the open data software most widely used to disseminate open data at the national level. So along with these tools and with the AI potential, for instance, to use vision, computational power in order to identify different elements in our environment, the application and use of digital public goods can be extremely powerful. This has a lot to do with DPI. Why? Well, we consider that these digital public goods may be used as building blocks to develop a digital public infrastructure, whether at the national level or at city level. And these systems may in turn provide services or features to society at large, including the public and private sector and all citizenry. And digital public goods may be implemented in such a way that is scalable, they are interoperable, and safe, inclusive, and affordable. And although the digital public infrastructure may be a combination of different elements, including open source and proprietary solutions, the idea is basically to use them in such a way as to be able to build different services on top of them. For instance, this initiative that I was just discussing was supplemented by Google. Google added this mobility data to the Google Maps service only because we were using this open standard. And it's not only about taking the technology and use it or building a tool that is specifically useful for certain purposes, but the most important reason why these are public goods may be used and adopted easily is because they are open license. That means that they can be modified and adapted to specific requirements wherever it is implemented to help these contributions that are made to different initiatives in order to maintain the different tools. It provides a greater possibility of control of the implementing governments or organizations in order to design and customize these solutions to their local environment. They are often cheaper to implement because there are no licensee fees, and they help create a local community as well. And if you are not yet convinced to use open source for open data, we are having great momentum to use this digital public infrastructure approach where different multilateral organizations are currently working on promoting the development of digital public infrastructure, including everyone that is attending this call, TPGA, and many others that are collaborating with these efforts. And there are different initiatives underway in order to fund initiatives of this type. And probably to start wrapping up, I would like to share something that we're working on, more specifically at TPGA on AI. We've just launched our framework for open AI that has been designed in order to become a part of this digital public goods. And our framework requires not only opening up all training data, but also requires that these models be designed in a certain way, considering the best practices. And we always do everything attempting to design a standard that may be supplemented by other open data models. In this case, we're doing that because we want these technologies to be completely transparent and available to all developers. But we also want them to contribute to meeting several local needs so that the market is not concentrated only in one or two companies or markets, so that there is a better representation of languages, cultures, and different value systems that may be represented not only in the models, but also in the data that is being used to train these models. We know that this is a far-reaching goal, so we are also launching a call for collaborative action for open data in the development of public interest artificial intelligence. The purpose of this call is to identify different tools that may help us in creating high quality data sets to train different artificial intelligence models. And not only do we want tools, but we would also like to identify the technical barriers facing governments, the artificial intelligence models whose development is already underway that may be shared and that may be promoted not only among software developers, but also with public policymakers and those that fund our efforts.
desarrolle de una manera
so that
transparente.
AI continues
Y
to be
pues bueno,
developed
si la gente está
transparently.
interesado un poco más
And if anyone
esta llamada y en
is
colaborar, pues
interested
la
in
podemos
finding out a little bit
explorar
more
cómo
about the goal,
podemos
in collaborating
monetizar
with that,
esta
or
red,
exploring this,
siéntanse libres
and how you can make a contribution,
de
please
mandarme un
feel
mensaje por
free
aquí
to
mismo,
reach
por
out to me
mi correo,
on the
por
chat, or I'm going to be
una de
sharing
las
my
redes
email
que
address,
tenemos
but this is
en
a very short
TPGA y
presentation
cómo se
of what
puede
we do
relacionar con
at
la construcción
TPGA
de la
and how it
infraestructura pública
relates
digital
to building
en
the
especial con
public
servicios de
digital
autonomía, servicios en la
infrastructure, particularly
inteligencia
when it
artificial.
comes to open data and AI.
Muchísimas gracias, Ricardo. Y seguramente
Thank
habrá
you so
algunos
much,
participantes
Ricardo. I'm
de la
sure that
relación
there are
que
many
es primera
attendees
vez
here
entrar
on the call
escuchando
that
sobre estas conexiones
have
entre las
heard
agendas.
about
Entonces,
these
yo
ties
seguro
between the
que
different
va a ser algo que
agendas
van a
for the very
entender.
first time here.
Em,
So I'm sure
Paso
that you're going to be receiving
sin
emails
perder más
once you
tiempo
share your
a nuestra
address.
segunda oradora.
We will move now
Aura
to our
Cifuentes.
second speakers.
Es
Aura
miembro del equipo de
Cifuentes.
inversión
Aura is a
de
member of the
CoDevelop
investment
y
team
actualmente
at
lidera el
CoDevelop,
portfolio
and she's
del
currently
latinoamericano.
leading the Latin American portfolio.
Aura,
Aura,
el espacio es tuyo.
the floor is yours.
Adelante, por favor.
Muchas gracias. ¿Me pueden
Thank you
confirmar si
so
están viendo
much. Can you
mi
please
cámara?
confirm if you can see my screen?
Sí, perfecto.
Perfecto. Vale, perfecto. Bueno,
Great.
mucho gusto. Mi nombre es
So it's
Aura
a pleasure
Cifuentes. Me
to be
emociona
here. I am Aura
muchísimo estar
Cifuentes.
acá.
I am extremely
Yo también había
thrilled to be
preparado
with
mi
you here today.
presentación
I had
en inglés,
already
así que mis slides están
presented
en inglés y
my
me voy
slides in
súper
English,
rápido
so my
porque
slides
estamos
are in English, but
hablando
the
de
three of
esto
us are
y
Latin
claramente por
American and we're talking
harmonización
about
voy a
these
hacer en
topics.
español.
So just for
Simplemente quiero empezar
standardization
diciendo
purposes, I'm
que
going to be speaking
para
Spanish.
mí es muy
I'd like to
emocionante poder
start
estar en un
by
espacio
saying
que
that I'm
busca conectar
thrilled to be
agendas.
in a space
Durante
that
muchos
seeks
años
to
trabajé en
find these
espacios
links
abiertos de
across
gobierno y de banca.
agendas
Yo
because I
dirigí
worked for
la
many
EDA
years on
de
open
infraestructura
government
pública
and open
digital y
data
parte de mi
agenda,
presentación
and now I'm
es
working on
compartir pues
DPI.
también unas
And part of my
reflexiones que han
presentation
tenido
has to do
co-develop
with
en el
sharing
camino
certain
tenido sobre
reflections that we've
cómo
had at
todo lo que hicimos en
CoDevelop
infraestructura
on
pública
how
digital
everything that we've
se
done in
conecta
the field
con
of
la agenda
DPI
de inteligencia
is
artificial y con la
closely
agenda de datos
connected to
abiertos.
the AI
Así que
agenda and the
obviamente les
open
voy a
data
detallar
agenda.
qué hacemos
So
en CoDevelop
naturally, I'm going to be sharing what we
y
do
cómo
at
funciona
CoDevelop
nuestro modelo de financiación y nuestro
and
modelo de
how our
apoyo a
financing
las diferentes
model and our
iniciativas,
support
pero
model
también cómo
works.
estamos viendo que
But I would also
estas
like
agendas se
to
conectan y
address
eso también está
how we
haciendo
see the
que nuestro modelo
interconnection
en
across
algunos
different
casos
agendas
cambie.
because that is making our model
Co-Develop es
change
un
in certain
fondo,
cases. CoDevelop is a
es
fund,
una non-profit global
is
que
a global
nuestro
nonprofit,
último objetivo
and
es que haya
our
más
ultimate
adopción de
goal
infraestructura pública
is
digital en
to
países.
promote the
¿Qué
adoption
quiere
of
decir eso? Que
digital public
nosotros
infrastructure
con un
across all
apoyo
countries.
en la
What does
mayoría de
that
casos
mean?
financiero,
That
buscamos que se mueva
often
la
with
cultura, que los
financial
países pasen
support,
de un
we
modelo de
seek to
digitalización
make a
que
difference
hemos
so
visto que
that
está
countries
medio en
may move
silos
from a
a un modelo de
digitalization
digitalización
model that we
más
see in silos
infraestructura,
today to one that
más de
is
poder
more
tener
based on
servicios
infrastructure,
compartidos,
on
más de
having
poder
shared
tener soluciones del
services,
sector privado
and on
co-creando y
having the public
hablando
and the private sector
sobre
co-creating
infraestructura
and
pública digital.
discussing digital
Entonces,
public
nosotros lo que
infrastructure.
buscamos es
Therefore,
encontrar
what
un
we
país
want
que tenga
is
una cierta
to find a
madurez,
country that
que
has a
tenga una
certain digital
iniciativa que esté priorizada y
maturity,
quieran
that
sacar
has
adelante, pues
prioritized
buscamos apoyar al
initiatives,
ecosistema que lo rodea. Y ese
and we
ecosistema
seek to
muchas
support
veces es el
the
sector privado, como
surrounding
ya dije,
ecosystem. The
startups,
ecosystem is
lo que
often the
llamamos
private sector,
estos equipos que
startups,
tienen soluciones de open source,
these
un poco
teams that have open source
viendo activos
solutions,
digitales,
these
han
digital
venido
public
siendo
goods
co-creados por
that have
startups, por
been
equipos
gradually co-created
locales
by
y globales.
startups, by local teams, and
También
global
apoyamos a
teams as
sociedad
well.
civil, también
We
muchas
also
veces
provide support to
apoyamos a
civil
academia que nos
society,
ayuda a
and we
hacer
often support
investigación,
the
que nos ayuda
academia
a
that
documentar
also
estos casos de
helps us
uso, que nos
conduct
ayuda a
research and document the
dar
use
evidencia sobre lo que
cases.
está funcionando en
They
nuestro
also help
gobierno.
us collect evidence on what's
Entonces,
working
básicamente
and
lo que
what's not
nosotros estamos
working.
buscando es pasar de
So
un modelo donde
our
solamente
goal
busquemos
is to move from a
solucionar temas
model where we're
tecnológicos y
only
técnicos de
seeking
corto plazo
to
a una mirada mucho más de
fix
mediano y largo plazo que
short-term
busque que
technological
probablemente
problems
los
to a
países
long-term
tengan una
view,
mirada más de
where
infraestructura a
countries
largo
may
plazo,
have a shared
sostenible e
infrastructure
inclusiva
view
y
that is
obviamente segura.
sustainable,
Entonces,
inclusive, and
parte un
safe.
poco de la razón de que Co-Develop nazca
So
y solamente un
that
poco la
is
historia.
why
Co-Develop nace
co-develop was
en
created.
COVID,
Co-develop
más o
was
menos
created
2020-2021,
post-COVID,
con un interés muy grande de nuestros
2020,
fundadores de poder
2021.
tener un equipo que se
And
pudiese
our
mover
funders
rápidamente
sought to have a very nimble team that could move in order to support those countries that already had a legacy, that had a certain journey in digital government to
Y eso nos
do this
lleva a tener un
transition
modelo
to digital
que
public
decía líder de
infrastructure.
apoyo
That
y
led
se
us
basan unos
to a
principios.
funding and
Y entonces
support
ya dije
model that is
algunos, por
based on
ejemplo,
different
uno
principles.
es pues
I've
volver
mentioned some of
países
them.
donde
One of them
exista
is to
una
focus on
demanda, que
countries
nosotros los
where
llamamos a
there is a
veces qualified
demand. We
demand,
call
que
them a
básicamente
qualified
es
demand,
países que
which
veamos
basically
que
means
no solamente
countries
están interesados, sino que
that
realmente
not
están
only
listos para
are
comprometerse
interested
a
but are
llevar a
also
cabo
ready
ese
to
cambio.
commit
Lo
to
segundo es que tengan un caso de uso definido, un problema
effect
que
that
esté muy bien
change.
definido y
Second, they should
y
have a
tan
very
claro, así
clear,
que
defined problem.
diagnosticar con evidencia y
Um,
puedan decir,
Almost
bueno,
we could say an
hemos visto ese
empirically
problema y necesitamos darle un
diagnosed
enfoque para
problem, like
poder
we've
nosotros
seen this
resolverlo
problem and we
y
need
que
a
haya
new
voluntad
approach in order
política,
to
es decir, los
overcome it.
champions en el
We need
gobierno son
the
muy
political
importantes
will, that
después
is,
de en
champions
una
in
hoja de
government are
ruta,
extremely important. It's important
es
to have a
vital para poder
roadmap.
asegurar esa
It's
sostenibilidad,
key in order
que
to
ya se
guarantee
hayan
that
identificado cómo
sustainability
son las
and also
infraestructuras de
to identify
coordinación
the
al
different
interior del gobierno para
coordination
que un proyecto así pueda
strategies
salir,
and structures
que
at
haya
the
voluntad de
government in order
comprometerse
to facilitate a project
concretamente, es
of this
decir, el hecho
kind.
de que el gobierno
Also, a willingness to
cofinance este
commit.
tipo de
The
iniciativas es
government
fundamental,
should
que haya un
be
presupuesto que
willing to
esté
co-finance
destinado
these
para que esto salga.
initiatives. It's
Es uno de
fundamental
los
to have a
criterios que revisamos.
budget in order to
También que
make
haya,
sure that this
obviamente,
may
una
be
clara
implemented. We
visión fija de
also
forma de
need a
implementación.
clear
Y por
vision and
último, que
roadmap
haya
for
una
implementation.
apertura
And
a
finally, we
co-crear y
need
aprender y a
opening
utilizar en
to
el mejor de los casos
co-create, to
herramientas y
learn,
soluciones de
and to
código
use
abierto.
open
Pues
source
dicho esto, pues
data
nosotros
and
tenemos
tools. That
obviamente
having
estos
been said,
principios que
of
Ricardo
course,
lo
we
decía,
have
nuestro
certain
interés no es
principles
solamente
that,
en
as
tener la
Ricardo was
demanda
saying, we're
cualificada, sino
interested not
poder
only in identifying
respetar
that qualified
principios de
demands, but also
modularidad,
on
de
respecting
opcionalidad y de
principles of
portabilidad, que nuestras
modularity,
empresas escojan la mejor
alternatives,
solución,
portability,
escojan
so
lo que
that every
mejor les
country may
sirve para
choose
su problema, para
the best
darle
possible
respuesta
solution, the
a la
solution that best
necesidad,
addresses their
pero la
needs
forma
and
en que lo
their
hacemos
issues.
es de
But
forma muy
how do we
ágil.
do it?
Buscamos
We do
cosas
it in a very
arbitrarias,
agile
buscamos
manner.
apoyar el
So we
ecosistema,
look for
buscamos
low-hanging
financiar a los
fruits. So we
intermediarios y
look
no a los
to
gobiernos,
support
y buscamos
intermediaries
obviamente
rather
pues
than
no poder
governments, and we also
enfocarnos
seek
solamente en las
to
soluciones de tecnología puramente,
focus
sino
not
que los
only
principios
on
nos importan
purely
muchísimo, es
technological
decir,
solutions, but
poder
also
tener
on
las
principles,
salvaguardas
which
de
are
los
of the
proyectos
utmost importance
le
for
dan
us.
ciertos
We want to
valores
make
y vamos a
sure
hablar un
that
poco
these
de eso más
projects
adelante.
protect
Entonces,
certain values,
dicho
and we're going
esto,
to address
nosotros
that further
arrancamos
along the
con un
talk.
diagnóstico que creo que
That
que
said,
muchos
we
de
started
nosotros
with a
hemos orbitado
diagnosis that I believe
alrededor de
that
las
many
agendas
of
de
us that
gobierno
have
digital hemos
orbited
visto y hemos
around
percibido,
digital public
y es que los
government
gobiernos
agendas
han
have
venido trabajando
perceived,
durante
and
muchos
that is
años
that
encima,
governments
han
have
venido
been
trabajando
working
con
in
unas
silos for a
agendas
very
de
long
gobierno
time.
digital
They've been
y que
working
cuando uno
on
las ve hoy en la práctica están
digital
orientadas
government
a
agendas
productos y
that what we
servicios
see in
y por
practice are
ende
very
de
much
forma
focused on
muy
products and
verticalizada.
services, and
Y eso
therefore they are
obviamente lleva
extremely
a que pues los
vertical.
gobiernos hoy estén
As a
muchas
result,
veces con una muy poca articulación e
governments
interoperabilidad entre sus
today
agencias, entre sus instituciones,
lack
llevan en
articulation
muchos casos
across
a los
different
gobiernos a estar
agendas and different
duplicidad.
institutions.
Entonces, muchas
They
veces se
often
hacen
have a
permisos
duplicity of
porque cada entidad
efforts,
tiene un
so they
registro,
are
por
often
ejemplo,
doing the
o
same
cada
thing
entidad
because
está
every
buscando
entity has its own
un cierto
registry,
formulario
or
para
every
tener
entity
datos
is
de la
seeking to
ciudadanía
have a
y
certain
eso
form in
obviamente
order to
implica
collect
duplicidad,
citizen
pero
data.
implica tal
And
vez lo
of
más
course,
grave
that
y es
carries a certain duplicity and something even
costo
more serious.
recae en la
The cost
ciudadanía.
of
Es la ciudadanía
inefficiency
la
is
que se está
paid by
enfrentando a
citizens.
ese costo
It
de
is
la duplicidad,
citizens
de
that
que
are
no
affording
tengamos
that
unos
cost of
estándares
duplicity
comunes, unos
and the
protocolos
lack of
comunes.
common standards
Y
or
esto
standard
obviamente,
products.
más allá de pues obviamente de que estemos trabajando en silos de
And
forma muy
beyond the fact
vertical,
that we're working in
también lleva a
silos
que
or
en lógicas de
in
data,
vertical
pues nos estamos dando
structures,
cuenta que
when
pues
it
muchas
comes to
veces los
data
datos no
logics,
están
we've come to
compartidos al
realize
interior
that
del gobierno, al
data
interior del
is
sector
often
público.
not shared
Muchos
by
de
the
los
public
servicios
sector.
de estos
So
servicios de
many of
cara a
these
la ciudadanía que se
services
lanzan
that are provided to
em,
citizens
no se hablan entre sí y
do not talk
obviamente
to
no
one
se coordinan.
another.
Entonces, esto hace pues que no
And
sea
as I
eficiente
said
y que
earlier,
realmente acá se estén
this erodes
llevando a cabo
efficiency
unos gastos y unos costos
and it
innecesarios.
creates
Entonces, obviamente,
unnecessary
con base en
costs
todo
and
esto, con base
expenditure.
en lo que hemos visto que han
So
sido las
based on all of
estratégicas
this and
comunicaciones
based on
de
the
los
different
gobiernos,
strategies that we have
nos
identified
hemos
on the part
además
of
cuenta que hoy
governments,
la ciudadanía,
we've
si
also
ponemos
come
al
to
ciudadano en el
realize
centro,
that
pues la
citizens, if
ciudadanía,
we put
además de que
the
frente a esta
citizen at the center,
fragmentación,
in addition to
se va
facing this
con el gobierno,
fragmentation fragmentation. There is also fragmentation between the government and the private sector, because anywhere in the world, every citizen interacts with both sectors constantly, and so we face that inefficiency and duplicity in both sectors.
que está
And that is
fragmentada,
the value of
verticalizada y en
moving
silos a
from
una
this
misma
vertical
temática que puede
siloed
compartir.
vision to a shared
¿Y
infrastructure
qué es
vision.
básicamente infraestructura pública digital? Que sé que es
What do
un
we
nuevo
mean when we
término que se
speak of
suma a
digital
esto,
public
al
infrastructure?
glosario de
Because I know
términos
that
en
it's
todo
a
el
new
mundo de
term that is
transformación digital.
just being
Una
incorporated
forma
in the
muy
digital
sencilla, y a mí esta
transformation
definición me
glossary.
encanta y me encanta
A very
además cuando
simple definition,
buscamos
which
como
I
la
love
combinación
because I
de la
love it
agenda de
when we
datos
try
abiertos y
to
la agenda
identify the
de
synergies
gobierno
with the open
abierto o
data
de AI,
agenda and the
está compuesta de
open
tres
government
grandes
agenda or the
capas.
AA
La
agenda
primera capa, que es la fundacional, es
consists
los
of
datos.
three different layers.
Necesitamos
The first
los
layer, the
datos
foundation layer,
descentralizados
is
que
data.
estén en
Of
el
course, we
mejor
need
de los
sound
mundos,
data.
pues
We need
públicos y
data
abiertos. Hay una
that
capa que
would
son los
be
componentes, que
public
básicamente
and
es
open,
todos
best case
esos hojas
scenario.
o hilos
And there is another
bondadosos,
layer that is
componentes,
components,
esos
these
legos
building blocks,
que
as we
podemos
call them in English,
reutilizar y
these
que en
Lego
cualquiera, en
parts
el
that we
mejor de
can
los escenarios
reuse
son interoperables, se pueden
and that,
reutilizar,
again, best case scenario
nos
are
permiten mover a
interoperable,
partir de ellos
reusable, and that
construir
allow
la
us
tercera capa, que son
to
los
build the
servicios, que
third
es
layer, which
realmente
is
la ciudadanía
services,
ve. Es
which
ahí es
is
donde la
what
ciudadanía
citizens
interactúa
actually
y usa
need. And that is
sus
where
medios con la
citizens
pública, con
actually
el gobierno o
interact
con los servicios.
with digital public infrastructure
Entonces, si
or
uno
with
obviamente eso
private
uno lo rompe y lo
infrastructure.
empieza como a mirar más en
So
detalle,
if we
los datos
start
acá se vuelven
trying
importantísimos
to
y
look at
en el
this
lenguaje
in a
propio
further
pues de estas
detail,
agendas, aquí los datos abiertos juegan un papel
open
fundamental en
data
la medida en
play a
que hayan
key
mejores
role
datos, datos de verdad de calidad,
because as we
datos que
get
estén
better data, quality
responsablemente
data,
generados, van a
data
poder
that
servir
is
para construir
responsibly
mejores
managed, they
componentes
will allow
y
us to
mejores
build better
servicios.
components and
Obviamente,
offer better
ya lo
services.
ven en la diapositiva, pero acá
As
también
you can see on the
entra todo
slide,
lo relacionado con registros, con
this
mapas,
also
como lo que
include
estabas
everything related
hablando,
to
con
registries, maps, as
récords
Ricardo
de,
was
por ejemplo, de salud,
explaining, healthcare
datos
records,
que
for
son sensibles,
instance, that also includes
pero pues
sensitive
la idea
data.
de que para nosotros los datos sean la capa
And
fundacional
the
también tiene mucho
idea
que
of
ver con
having data as
empoderar
the
a la ciudadanía
foundational
y
layer
la
has to
ciudadanía
do with
también pueda tener una
empowering citizens
accountability,
so that
pueda también
citizens
tener el
may
poder
also
como de
demand
revisar y
accountability
de
and they
revisar
may
y de
be
medir cuánto
empowered to
compartimos de esos
control,
datos.
review, and
En la
request the
segunda
amendment
capa,
of
que son
that
los
data.
componentes, que
The
es como
second layer, the
los
components
bloques de
layer,
código,
as we
pues
said,
viene
these
todo
are
lo que
the
está
building
relacionado con
blocks. That includes
autenticación,
everything
con
related
pago,
to
cambio de
authentication,
datos, donde otra
payments,
vez los
data
datos vuelven a ser
exchange.
muy
Once
importantes.
again, the
Y
data
acá, pues los
plays a key
componentes y
role
tal vez los
in this
principios más
layer,
importantes
and the
son los de
components and the
interoperabilidad,
most
los de
important
poder reducir la
principles
brecha
are
y los de poder
interoperability,
tener en el
reusability,
mejor de los mundos
and
código abierto y
if at all
estándares
possible,
abiertos.
we
¿Y
should
esto
have
por qué es
open
importante?
source and open
Porque esto nos
standards.
va a permitir que
Why
los
is that
países realmente tengan soberanía y
important?
la soberanía
Because
pues
that will
básicamente es un
actually
concepto
guarantee
de
sovereignty for all
documentos.
countries, and
En el día a día los
sovereignty
países
goes
realmente van a poder
beyond
controlar
black
esto,
and
van a poder
white.
defender los
We
principios
want
de transparencia.
countries to be
Tan
able
importantes
to
para la agenda de
control
gobierno
this and to
abierto y datos
defend the
abiertos,
transparency
y también
principles
que
that
puedan
are
respetar
key
pues todos los
to
principios
the
de
open data
seguridad
on over
inclusive.
government agendas,
Y
and
por último,
also
los
to
servicios,
respect
¿no? Que ya lo dije,
security
pues esto va
and
desde
inclusion
sacar el
principles. And
pasaporte
finally,
hasta tener un
services,
seguro de
because
salud,
that
un
is going
seguro de
to be
vida.
the
Y acá es donde la
that
ciudadanía
is going to
pues
include everything
realmente
from, I don't know,
interactúa
obtaining your
con el
passport or
Estado,
having
con esta
life
infraestructura
insurance.
pública
This is
digital.
where citizens
Pero
interact
esto
with
tiene
this
sentido y
digital
pueden
public
hacer de estos servicios
infrastructure.
de mejor calidad siempre
And
y cuando estén
these
basados
services are
en una
going to be
infraestructura que
better
sea
quality if
moderna.
they are based
Nosotros
on
siempre
a
hablamos
modular
en Co-Develop
infrastructure.
que uno de
We are
nuestros
always talking
mayores
about
sueños y
co-develop.
deseos es que todo lo que el
At
gobierno
co-develop,
haga
one of
sea
our biggest
faster,
dreams
cheaper y better,
is
¿no? Como
to
que
make
cada
every
vez sea
country
más ágil,
faster,
más
cheaper,
barato y
and
mejor.
better.
Y para que eso pues, se pueda dar,
And
pues la
in order to
modularidad de
make
las
that dream
infraestructuras
come
digitales.
true,
Y
modularity
normalmente
is
nosotros en
essential.
Co-Develop terminamos
And
acá,
we at
esto es como la
co-develop
definición de DPI,
generally
pero en
finished
los últimos
here. This
meses
is our
hemos venido como
definition
en
for
una conversación
DPI. But
interna
over the
sobre
last few
en
months,
dónde
we've been
entra
having a
la agenda de inteligencia
conversation,
artificial.
including
Y para nosotros la
also
agenda de
the
inteligencia
AI
artificial
agenda.
entra
And the AI
basándose en
agenda
lo
to
que ya
us
existe en
fits
infraestructura pública
this
digital. Es
based
decir,
on what's
AI
already
no entra a
available
reemplazar
in terms of
DPI,
digital public
entra
infrastructure.
a construir un
AI will
sobre
not replace DPI,
y
it
entra a
will
construir
build
sobre
upon
DPI
DPI.
porque parte de lo que nosotros
And it will build
entendemos de
on top
todo
of
esto es
DPI
que
because what we
la AI no va a poder funcionar de una
understand from
forma
all of
con
this
propósito y
is
de la
that
mejor forma
AI
posible
cannot
si no
work in
tenemos
the best
justamente
possible
buenos
way
datos, buenos
if we don't
componentes y
have
buenos
good
servicios.
data, good
Y acá
components,
puse
and
tres
good
ejemplos que son
services.
los que
So
hemos
here I have three
explorado
examples that are the
recientemente y
examples
es,
that
si
are
hablamos de
that we have
inteligencia artificial,
been
es el más
recently exactly exploring.
justamente en este
If
caso,
we talk
ellos van a
about
necesitar tener
artificial intelligence for health,
información de
we are
pacientes,
going to
eso
need
que llamamos patient records,
patient
y
data or
muy
patient
probablemente
records,
identidad digital que se asegura.
and
para poder justamente sobre
also
esto poder construir
secure
mejores
digital
algoritmos, mejores modelos
identity in order to be
predictivos,
able to
para que
build
podamos
better
aprender mucho más rápido sobre complejas
algorithms,
estructuras.
better
Si hablamos
predictive
de
models in
agricultura,
order
muchas
to
veces AI va a estar
accelerate our
usando
learning on
técnicas
our
muy específicas de
services.
agricultura
If
de
we talk
cambio
about
climático,
agriculture,
necesitan
there is
utilizar datos
AI based on
localizados,
certain
pero
specific projects, for
regístricos y
instance,
registros
for climate
exclusivamente en uno de
change
esos
that needs
componentes que yo
satellite
llamamos DPI
information, but also
y tema de
registries.
detección
And
de fraude en
registry is
dual
also a very
para poder
important
detectar
component.
esos fraudes y
Same
poderlos
thing as
combatir de
for
forma más
fraud
eficiente.
detection. In
Se
order to
necesitan
identify and
transacciones, se necesita
fight
tener
fraud
estos datos transaccionales.
effectively, we need
Muchos
that
de esos
data, we
casos
need that
están en los
transactional
componentes de
data,
DPI.
and in many
Entonces,
cases,
simplemente
they are in
para
DPI
concluir,
components. So
para
just to
nosotros es
wrap
muy
up,
importante siempre resaltar que DPI no es
for us,
solamente
it's always
tecnología.
extremely
Es más,
important to say
cuando
DPI
ustedes
goes far
revisan el
beyond
portafolio de todos
technology.
los tipos de grantees y de
What's more,
proyectos que
when
tenemos
you
en el
review the
mundo,
portfolio
eso
of
tiene que ver mucho más
grantees,
con principios y con
initiatives
valores
that we
que
have
con
throughout the
tecnología. Por
world,
eso lo decía al
they
comienzo,
are much
muchos
more
de nuestros
closely
grantees
related to
son
principles
sociedad
and
civil,
values than
porque para nosotros la
technology.
sociedad
Many
civil
of our
son esos
grantees
ojos y esa
come
voz
from
de la
civil society
ciudadanía
because
en los
civil
proyectos de
society
DPI,
are the
hablan
citizens'
con el
eyes and
gobierno,
ears in DPI
interactúan con el
projects.
gobierno.
They
Entonces,
interact
para
with the
nosotros,
government.
cuando combinamos el
So
entender
when
que
we
el protocolo de
manage
datos
to
abiertos hace parte
combine
de la
this
carta
understanding that
fundacional,
open data
parte de
is
la
part of the
carta más
foundational layer
básica de
and is
DPI
part of the
y
most
AI está
basic DPI
construyendo a
layer,
partir de todo
and
eso,
AI
lo que
is
nosotros
building on
estamos
top of
viendo es
that,
que
what we
DPI lo que
see
está permitiendo asegurar o
is
llevar
that
a
DPI
un nivel
allows
ultra
us
sofisticado es todos los temas
to
de
achieve
privacidad
more
y la ciudadanía
sophistication regarding all
controle
privacy issues because
el que
citizens may
pertenecen sus datos.
control
Lo
and
segundo es
own
temas de
their own
accountability,
data.
además de rendición y petición de
Second,
cuentas. La
accountability and
sociedad
everything that
civil
has to
crea
do
y le ayuda a
with
darle forma
civil
a todos
society,
los building blocks y obviamente los
shaping all the
servicios
different building
y
blocks and
permite
services.
fortalecer toda la
And it
modalidad de
also
confianza que es
permits to
tan importante en nuestras
strengthen
regiones. Yo
trust, which is
particularmente
so
estoy
important
liderando toda
across
la
our
región de
region. I
América
am
Latina
personally
y el Caribe
leading
y
the
sabemos
portfolio
que
for Latin America
definitivamente
and
la
the
confianza
Caribbean,
es
and we
un
know
retroceso
firsthand
botella.
that
Entonces,
trust
el
is
poder
one
tener
of those
estándares abiertos,
bottlenecks.
el poder
So the
tener
possibility of
más
having open
transparencia, va a
standards and
reducir la
greater
opacidad y va a
transparency is
reducir
going to
cualquier
reduce
riesgo de
opacity
corrupción
and is going to
y
mitigate
obviamente
any potential
lo que ya
risks
mencioné,
of
temas de
corruption.
soberanía, es decir, al final
And
lo que
of
estamos
course, as I
buscando es que
mentioned earlier,
realmente los países
sovereignty,
puedan
because
controlar su ruta de
at the end of the
transformación
day, we want
digital
every
y
country to be
puedan
able
hacerlo a
to
través de tener
take
más
ownership
herramientas
over their
abiertas
own
y
digital
menos
transformation
herramientas
journey
propietarias
through
para evitar
open
que
tools
queden
and
atrapados en cualquier
fewer
tipo de
proprietary
contrato
tools so that they
con
will not
cualquier
be
tipo de
trapped in any type
proveedor.
of a
Así
contract
que nada,
or
simplemente
tied
decirles
to a
que esto
certain
es
specific
una
provider.
conversación, me encanta que
So
hayan
that's
propuesto
all.
esta
I
conversación,
loved
es
it
algo que
that
desde el
you
ecosistema de
proposed this
DPI
topic for
cada vez
discussion.
estamos
It
pensando
belongs with the
más y es cómo
DPI
conectar estas
ecosystem,
agendas.
and
Y solo
we
para
are
cerrar,
thinking more and
muchos de
more
los
of how to
grantees que
connect these
nosotros
agendas.
tenemos
And
son
just to wrap up, many of
equipos
the
que
grantees that we
están
currently have
curando y
are
desarrollando
teams that
de
are
permanencia
currently curating
soluciones
and
en código
developing
abierto, lo que llamamos como los
open
DPG
source
teams, que
solutions,
lo
what
mencionaba
we call
Ricardo,
DPGs
y ya
teams
sabemos
that
de primera mano
Ricardo
que
also
muchos de esos
mentioned.
equipos
And we
ya
know
están
firsthand that many
integrando
of these
inteligencia
teams
artificial en sus
are
soluciones,
already
lo están piloteando
integrating
con
artificial
países y
intelligence
para
as part
nosotros
of
eso hace
their
parte pues como de
solutions.
la
They are
segunda
doing
fase de
pilots with
poder
different
seguir
countries, and for us, that
apoyando y
is part of
financiando
the
este
second
tipo de
phase to
iniciativas.
continue to support and
Muchas
fund this
gracias.
type of
Cierro ahí.
initiatives. Thank you very much.
Espectacular,
That's it.
muchísimas
Thank you
gracias, Aura,
so
por
much,
esta
Aura,
presentación.
for your
Seguro van
presentation.
a estar preguntándose los datos de
I'm
contacto,
sure
así que si
that you are
querés
going to be
saber dónde
requesting your
pueden
contact
escribirles
details. So if you want
en
to
el
share
chat,
your contact details on the
espectacular.
chat, that'd be
Creo
great.
que eso, para quienes quizás son
And
más del mundo de, como decía
that's
vos, de
it for
datos
those of
abiertos y
you
código
that come
abierto.
from
Todo esto
the
de
open
DPI
data
nos
and
llevó
open
como
government
a volar.
world.
Y entonces
DPI was sort
necesitamos,
of a
creo
big
que
wave that hit
ese
us.
aprendizaje
So I
fuerte para
believe that
nuestra región.
this session is for
Voy a
learning for
pasar
our
a
whole community.
nuestro último
I'm going
orador,
to
no por
move
eso
to the
menos
last speaker
importante,
of the
Manuel
day.
Aguilera.
Last
Es
but not
el
least,
lead
Manuel
para Latinoamérica
Aguilera,
y el
that is the
Caribe
lead for
de
Latin America and
Center
the
for Digital
Caribbean
Public
of the Center
Infrastructure.
for Digital Public
Tuve también el
Infrastructure.
placer de compartir un evento
I
con Aura y con él
had the
un
honor of
evento
sharing with
específicamente
Aura and with
sobre
him an event that was
DPI para
specifically on
Caribe.
DPI for the
Nada,
Caribbean.
sé que tienen muchísimas experiencias, así
I
que
know that you
Manuel,
have a lot of
igual acá esperando
experience.
tu
So,
presentación. The floor
Manuel,
is
we are
yours.
here waiting eagerly for your presentation. The floor
Gracias,
is
gracias
yours.
Nati. Ahí estoy
Thank you very much,
compartiendo. ¿Me
Nati.
confirman si ven bien?
Here I am sharing the presentation.
Sí, perfecto.
Bueno, perfecto. Bueno, primero que nada, gracias por la invitación.
First and
Y bueno,
foremost,
feliz de estar
thank you
acá
very much
hoy
for the
con
invite.
Aura
It's a
y
pleasure to
con
be with
Ricardo.
you today with Aura and
Creo que voy a
Ricardo.
romper un poco el flujo de la
I believe
presentación y
that
algún
I'm
momento vamos
going
a
to
pasar al inglés
disrupt
porque
the
preparé la
flow because
presentación
at
en
some
inglés
point in the
y si no
presentation
se
I'm going to move to English because
me hace
I
cortocircuito.
prepared my presentation in English
Espero que no esté tan bueno como
and my
Ricardo lo está
brain
haciendo en
short
vivo,
circuits. I'm not as
pero
good as Ricardo
bueno.
to do it live.
Empiezo en español, me presento,
So I'm going to
soy
start with
líder
English,
para América
with
Latina y el
Spanish.
Caribe de
My name
CDP.
is Manuel Aguilera,
Somos
and I am the regional lead for Latin America and the
un grupo
Caribbean
pequeño
at
de una organización relativamente nueva
CPI.
que tiene un
We are a
foco
relatively
en
new
América Latina y el
organization
Caribe, en África
that
y en Asia.
has a
Y
presence in Latin America, the
básicamente la
Caribbean,
misión, el foco es ayudar
Asia,
a los gobiernos
and
a diseñar
Africa. And
mejor y
our
más
focus is
escalable
helping
infraestructura
governments design
pública
better
digital
and more
que ha trabajado con
scalable digital
cerca
public
de
infrastructure.
40
We are
gobiernos
working
en
with
varias regiones del
approximately
mundo.
40 governments
Y mi
in
rol
three
es
regions
precisamente
throughout the
poder
world.
trabajar
And my role is
en América
precisely
Latina y el Caribe. Mi background
anchoring in
también
Latin
es de
America
sociedad
and the
civil.
Caribbean. My
Vengo de
background
ese
is
mundo
also
de
from civil society,
organizaciones
so I come from that world, from
también
a civic tech
en nuestra región.
nonprofit
Y mi
that
background
also
es de
works in our
administración pública,
region.
políticas públicas
And
y social
I
science.
have a
Así que
background
hoy
in
no me voy a
sociology and
meter en
public
profundidad
policy,
con temas
social
de
sciences,
tecnologías, más
basically.
bien
So I'm
creo que
not going
tenemos que
to be
saber desde
addressing
una perspectiva
any
de políticas
specific
públicas
technology
para
purposes, but
construir
rather what we need to know
infraestructuras
from a
públicas
public
digitales
policy
más
perspective
resilientes y
in
más
order to
inclusivas
build
en lo
more
que hace
resilient and
a
more
América Central.
inclusive
Y ahora sí voy a cambiar
public infrastructure in
al inglés.
what it has to do with
And I'm
data
going to talk a little bit
sharing.
about data sharing from a GPI perspective. And for us, open data, it's a critical component of data sharing, but it's not the only one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and a lot actually, about how design data sharing systems and schemes that are a little bit more user-centric. And when I mean by user-centric is not just about creating accountability for governments, and as Aura well described, but also as how we can enable better access both for public services, but also for private services. And I'm going to start with a simple and basic distinction, which is personal data and non-personal data. And I think it's really important to understand how these two approaches require different perspectives. So we'll need to design different architectures and different governance models for each of these. So as a short introduction on what data non-personal data sharing is, and here is when we discuss open data sets. And these open data sets will enable us better research, monitoring, trend analysis, and more increasingly AI training. And for this, governments can do many things. The first one is, of course, open their data repositories, but also they can create decentralized networks, policy networks for anonymized data sharing, basically. So in this context, in these models, what governments can do is encourage institutions to publish their own data sets under their own brands while keeping control and keeping their own brands and retribution for these data sets and enabling these open data sets. We encourage a data economy that's more open, but also that's privacy preserving, and we avoid centralization. In a completely different field, we find personal data sharing. So personal data sharing, again, it's a different approach. We will need a different governance and a different architecture and different policy decisions. And the traditional data sharing approach has been real-time APIs. So what many governments have been trying to do is to build or to implement these interoperability platforms that enable different government agencies to exchange data securely and automatically between them. So the main goal, while there are many, the main goal for these interoperability platforms can be condensated in one simple principle, that it's the once only principle. Basically, this once only principle says that citizens should be asked for the same for each piece of information just once. So take Argentina, which is the country where I live. So every time I want to renew my driver's license, the government will ask for a paper certificate that another government provides me, saying that I don't have any fines to pay. So with proper interoperability, those systems could talk to one another and we would avoid all this paper trail. And the logic can apply to any sector, to healthcare, to education, to employment, to banks, etc. So if we get interoperability right, every time you go to a doctor, the doctor shouldn't ask you for all the information that you have already told to your previous doctor. And probably the most famous interoperability platform is the X-Road that a lot of governments have applied, but all governments tend to build their own. So I don't know, we have Conecta.gov.br, which is Brazilians, Interoperar, which is the one in Argentina, and so on. We have most governments create their own interoperability platforms. And how this works from an architecture perspective is each agency within government runs a security server that acts as a gateway that basically enables one to access or not the certain information. So these servers communicate directly, they use encrypted channels, and we avoid central databases. So each agency retains control over their own data. So basically you can think of these platforms as if it was a highway, but this highway not just connects how data flows, but they also include all these checkpoints that basically decides or enables for you to access or not this highway, or in this case, which data you can access and under what conditions. So this is the vision, right? This is the vision that it's an ecosystem where all these systems can speak to one another and data can flow freely, but also securely, and that different systems can pull the different data from different systems, preserving safety measures, preserving privacy, and preserving consent. So, for example, the Ministry of Health can pull data from, I don't know, like the civil registry to know if a citizen is an underage, for example, and then the civil registry can respond directly through this platform in a system-to-system communication in real time. This system is safe, it's efficient, it's scalable, and can apply to many sectors. It can apply to almost every country, and it can also apply to different levels of governments. So on paper, these systems should work just fine. But the reality is not so simple. So there are a lot of bumps in the road that have made these systems hard to scale. What are these problems? So to begin with, these systems are pretty expensive to set up and are pretty expensive to run. At a second level, you also need a lot of technical capacity, especially because you're configuring and installing a security server in each terminal. And consent is not always easy, as most of these platforms don't have it as a native function. Finally, you need a lot of institutional maturity or a lot of institutional alignment. So for federal countries, as Miron, as Argentina, having to articulate between all the different levels of governments, it's particularly complex. This means that adoption tends to be slow and scaling to the private sector is almost impossible. And then this is a model that doesn't really scale for cross-border use cases. I mean, there have been a few integrations on this interoperability platform across country, but it's really challenging to think how this model could scale at a planetary challenge. So that pulls us back to square one. So in many countries, but especially in developing countries, we are again stuck with paper, and we rely on printed documents to go to each of these agencies to access these services, and the same applies for the private sector. Let's say you need to prove that you have paid your fines or that you have an academic credential to access a job. Generally, you still rely on paper to prove that. So this creates a lot of friction for governments and a lot of friction for people, and creates also a lot of bureaucracy. And actually, this is the hidden root cause of a lot of exclusion from many services and opportunities. So think about every time you need to access a government benefit, a loan, you need to access healthcare or employment, all the documents and all the attributes that you need to prove. In an ideal world, where all those systems could speak to one another, you wouldn't never need to present these papers, but that's not the reality we live in. So people and agencies have adapted, they have found their workarounds, And now most of us are using WhatsApp, email, Google Drive as a mechanism to share official documents. This is convenient, it's easy to use, but again, it has some limitations. It's not always safe, and there are no ways of verifying that these documents are authentic. So the verification of these documents, it's usually manual, and it comes with very high cost. So institutions need to verify that these documents are authentic before onboarding a person to a new service, and this creates delays, it creates friction, and it creates exclusion. So the question that we can ask ourselves is if we can build any mechanism that it's as simple as WhatsApp, but with the trust and the security of system-to-system integration. And the easiest way to get there is just turning every document into what we call a verifiable credential. What is a verifiable credential? It's basically adding a layer of verifiability to any document that a person holds. And the way to do it is by signing that document with a QR code. This creates high trust to a document, but at a very low cost mechanism. So you keep that document as a human readable form, because you can still issue it as a PDF or as a paper, as a printed document, but now you make it also machine readable. You make it tamper-proof, as this document is digitally signed. You make it accessible via open APIs, and it can be issued in many mechanisms. It can be issued in a paper format, but also it can be portable in an app, in a digital wallet. And it also captures consent, because as you have the person holding those documents, consent becomes really easy to implement. Now think of this as scale. Actually, you are basically essentially unlocking the same once only principle, except that in this model, you're putting users at the center. You're putting users and citizens at the center of the equation. And this is why we call it a user-centric data sharing approach. So as a recap, we have divided data sharing into two separate fields. One is non-personal data sharing, and the second one is personal data sharing. And in the same order, we have divided personal data sharing into two different mechanisms: verifiable credentials and real-time API. I think it's important to state that these two solutions can coexist. You don't need to choose between verifiable credentials or interoperability platforms. Actually, most cases can be solved and can be unlocked by any of those mechanisms, but there are still some cases where you will need real-time data sharing, and there are some cases that can only be use cases that can only be unlocked by verifiable credentials and digitally signed documents. But both should follow the same consent and privacy-preserving mechanisms, focusing on improving the user's experiences in access digital services, both in the private and in the public sector. So let me go back a little bit to verifiable credentials and how these work. These verifiable credentials, as I was mentioning, can be stored in different formats, and this enhances inclusion. You can still have these documents as paper certificates with a QR code that makes it verifiable. You can hold it in your wallet, in an app, in your phones. And this is the approach a lot of governments are taking in our region, basically creating these digital wallets where citizens can store official documents. And you can have cloud wallets, which is particularly relevant for countries that don't have a lot of smartphone penetration. Actually, a cloud wallet is just an endpoint where you can download safely all your credentials. And how is the architecture for this? So basically, you have three actors. You have the institution that issues the credential, you have the user, and you have the institution that needs to accept that credential. Sometimes we call them credentials consumer or credential verifiers. So in a really simple process, any institution that issues any type of document, let's say that's an ID, a bank record, a health record, etc., can incorporate a simple business process at the end of the issuance mechanism to sign this QR code. To sign this credential with a QR code. Then that certificate is issued to the user in the same mechanism as you usually do, or now you can incorporate a wallet. That citizen can decide who to show that credential to. So if it's in a system-to-system mechanism, so if you're sharing it through a portal, or if you are doing it in person by showing your credential but through your wallet, you can also incorporate selective disclosure. So the user now can decide what information they want to share and what information they don't. And for us, this can easily scale outside government. Anyone can issue a document as a VC, and anyone can check if that document is authentic. It doesn't matter if this is a government record, such as an ID, tax returns, land records, etc., or a privately issued document. I don't know, like a hospital record, an academic credential, a bank statement. And in fact, this ecosystem can be so open that a lot of wallets can come into play. Let's say tomorrow you want to build a specialized wallet that addresses specifically the needs in the health sector. You can create a specialized wallet. What do we need to unlock at scale verifiable credentials and a more inclusive data sharing mechanism? We need governments that opt for global standards for policy and adoption. So we have a lot of already ready to go standards that can ensure interoperability in a radical way. We need to support all the institutions that are issuing documents to do it as verifiable credentials. We need wallets that are user-centric and that governments can build their own, but they can also enable an ecosystem of wallets that are interoperable between them. And we need to drive usage on the acceptance side, on the institutions that can verify those formal credentials. This is actually the easiest part in terms of technology, but we know cultural change sometimes takes a while. So there, as Ricardo was saying a while ago, and I would also reinforce, there are a lot of open specifications and open source tools that can accelerate this implementation and that can help governments bring this time from a few years to a few months, and they can have their solutions live later this year if they want to start now. And actually this is becoming the trend, and this is the path a lot of governments are pursuing. So India has more than 500 million people using DigiLocker. Argentina took the same path and put out their driver's license in just 65 days. The European Union is also taking this path, and other countries such as Singapore are also incorporating more and more verifiable credentials into their stack. So to finalize, credentialing creates trust mechanisms for data to move around more freely, to accelerate economic growth, and to make access to public services easier. So the tools exist; they are already there. The standards are already there, and the need is real. But in the end, for us, the solution is simple: is trusted data in the hands of the people. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Manuel. Fue buenísima también cómo se conectaron las
Thank you very
presentaciones.
much. It was great the way one conversation led to the other, because we saw some classical cases of GPI, and for some people that might have been the first part they learned about that. We have only one comment, and we have two, and I don't know if you're going to be able to address them or react to them. That is Diego Enriquez saying that probably maintaining physical and digital credentials may prove important, given, for instance, the blackout that took place in Spain and Portugal a while ago, but that also actually blocked cellular and mobile networks. Do you have any examples? Because I understand that there should be a transition in this regard. And there's a paper trail backend, of course.
La realidad es que hoy la mayoría de los registros
And
que tienen los gobiernos están
most
digitalizados.
records that governments have right now are
Entonces, esos
digital.
registros ya están de forma digital. Lo que
So
permite el enfoque de credenciales verificables es
what
emitir
verifiable
documentos
credentials will
en
allow
diferentes
us to do is to
formatos.
issue these documents in different
Seguir
formats.
teniendo el soporte
Of
físico
course,
es importante.
continue to have
La
physical
licencia de
support
conducir, uno la puede
is
tener en el
important.
teléfono y la puede tener
You
en
can
la
have your
billetera. Pensemos en
driver's
las tarjetas
license
de
on your
crédito.
phone,
Uno
or
se
think of
suele
your
llevar una
credit
tarjeta de
cards.
crédito en la billetera.
You still carry
Luego,
your credit
además,
cards in your
guarda
wallet,
tarjetas en el
but
celular
more and
para
more
tenerlas
you
almacenadas
use them
en el
from
teléfono.
your
Entonces, el
smartphone.
enfoque de credenciales verificables, y yo creo que por
So
mucho tiempo va a ser
this
así,
verifiable credential
está
approach,
pensado
I believe
para
for a very long
cohabitar los
time,
mundos, el
is
mundo
thought
digital y el
for
analógico.
the cohabitation of both worlds. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this clarification. And we've reached the end. I apologize to those that have other comments or questions. I don't want to take any more of your time. To our speakers and also everyone that joins today's call, I want to wish you a very fruitful Open Government Week. You have all the contact details on the chat, and we're going to be sending an email when we upload the video with all the contact details in the mail as well. Thank you very much to Aura, Ricardo, and Manuel, and to all the members of our community that attended this session. And let's see each other next month.